we want to get started? Yeah.
It's my very first time.
Good evening, TIF Commission. We'll call this meeting to order. Hillary, if you'd call the roll.
Gary Groman. Here. Greg Baker. Here. Betsy McConnell. Alex Williams.
Here.
Angie Teal.
Present.
Michael Pinkley.
Here.
Brandon Williams. Here. Nick Plummer.
Here.
Cole Courier.
Here.
Sonia Meyer.
Here.
Cody Fenton. You have a quorum.
Good evening, TIF Commission. My name is Lindsay Kolish. I'm an attorney with Lawborough Municipal Law. We serve the city of Branson in the role of Special Economic Development Counsel, and that's why I'm here tonight to give you some TIF training. We do not have a pending TIF application, but we are in preliminary discussions with a potential developer. So we thought it would be a good idea to start some training and make sure that we all know each other, that we know what's going on with TIF, and that we're able to kind of get started. First, we will have some preliminary matters to elect a chair and a vice chair. And I understand that you probably are thinking, I don't even know what a chair would be doing on this commission. It won't be a ton. It'll be, leading the meetings mostly. If a TIF plan is filed, there would be likely just one meeting of the TIF commission, and then the chair would be leading that meeting. But city staff and ourselves as consultants would help you through that. So it won't be a huge task, but if we could get any nominations for chair and vice chair.
I nominate Cody Fenton because he didn't show up.
Is it fair to ask everybody to kind of introduce themselves and kind of say?
Sure, that would be fine too.
I tried. Oh, there it is. Does that help? I thought my voice would carry. My request was for everybody to go through and introduce themselves and say what they do, so maybe we can. Okay, thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, if we want to just start
Yeah.
down here and go through.
Sure, I'm Cole Courier, a resident of the area for about 20 years, real estate broker, and a member of the Branson School Board.
Sonia Meyer, and I am representing the Branson School Board as well, and we have hospitality-related businesses here in town.
Greg Baker, I've been here 31 years. Currently, my job is Chief Lending Officer at Branson Bank, and that's really most of what I've done here, is make commercial loans to businesses here in town.
Michael Pinkley, I'm representing the city. I currently serve on the Finance Committee.
Gary Groman, representing the city, currently on the Planning Commission. I'm a reporter and columnist for the Branson Globe.
Angie Teal with the Branson Convention Center, also representing the city of Branson. I've been a resident here for just about a year and a half, but no stranger to Missouri. Grew up here and went to school in Springfield, Missouri.
Alex Williams, resident 20 years, local business owner representing the city, and I'm also a member of the Branson Finance Committee.
Brandon Williams, born and raised, 44 years, and represent Taney County. Mike's right here in front of me. How's this? Brandon Williams, born and raised, 44 years, and represent Taney County as Taney County Commissioner.
Nick Plummer, Taney County Presiding Commissioner, lifelong resident of Taney County, 5th generation.
Okay, so I do think we heard a motion. Are there any other motions?
Greg Baker. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were nominating people still. Is that?
Yes, we would need a motion and then also a second.
Okay.
So your current motion is for the chair? You only
Yes.
have one at this time, which is Cody Fenton, is that correct?
Yes.
For the chair? I'll second that motion.
Hillary, would you call the vote? I guess, I'm sorry, we can just do a roll call, I think.
A voice vote or a roll call?
Voice vote, sorry.
So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Okay, so we just nominated Cody Fenton as the chair. Is that accurate? Okay. I'm sorry, what? I missed it. What is happening?
We will. Hey. We will.
Okay. I thought I heard the motion was for Cody Fenton.
The original motion on the floor was for Cody Fenton.
I think the lack of understanding is, was there a motion or a nomination, and how
Got it.
My understanding
do those interact? There were two, I heard two nominations.
It's not that hard. We'll figure it out in just a second. So we already have a motion. We called a vote. We have a vote. So now I nominate Greg Baker as vice chair.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. Okay, so we have elected Cody Fenton as the chair and Greg Baker as the vice chair.
Congratulations. For the purposes of tonight, all we have next is the training, so we can just go ahead and get started on that unless anybody has anything else. Nope, okay. Okay, so these are the 12 topics that we will talk about tonight. So this is the TIF Commission, and it would consider any TIF plans that are submitted to the city. So what is tax increment financing? That's what we'll discuss tonight. But it is literally financing that is done by the increment of taxes. It is a tool that is used to remediate blight and to promote economic development, whereby that increment of tax revenue that is increased by a development project that is used to finance the project that the developer develops. Without this incentive to develop, it's likely that that project would never have been developed. That's the hope, that is what TIF asks us to find, is that but for the use of TIF, that this development would not have occurred. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but the goal tonight, I'm going to talk about a couple different concepts. They'll come back and forth, and hopefully by the end of it, we'll have a full concept of how this works. Okay, so tax increment financing. The state legislature allows us to do this. It's the TIF Act, sections 99.800 through 99.865. Luckily for you, you don't have to read those or memorize those. That's what we're here for, to help you through them. The idea of TIF is that it encourages redevelopment projects that increase property value, and that that economic activity would not have occurred but for the development. The way that the TIF Act is written, it reads really as if a city would sort of identify its own economic development areas that it wanted a development in, and that would seek requests for proposals to do a development there. But how it actually works is that usually a developer will approach the city and say, I have this development I would like to do, but it's not feasible. I need the tax increment financing to be able to get this project to be feasible for me to do. There are 3 different types of TIF. One is a blighted area, and that's the one that we see most often. It's used most often. There's also a conservation area, which is a little bit less than blight. It's not quite blighted yet, but it's on its way getting there. And then there is also an economic development area, and this one we don't use too much. There's a little bit of question about it sometimes with the courts, and what we typically do see is that it's a blighted area. That's typically what we use. So now I'll talk about a couple different TIF concepts. The first one to understand is that TIF does not create any new taxes. What it does is redirect the incremental increase of taxes from that development project back to the developer to pay for their redevelopment project costs. And it does that through 2 different methods. First is payments in lieu of taxes. These are related to property taxes. And when a TIF is active, whatever that development project generates in property taxes over the amount before there was no development there, so the development is there, and then ideally it creates additional property taxes, those are captured and then put into the special allocation fund. Economic activity taxes function a similar way. These are typically sales taxes. That's mostly what it is. And when TIF is active, 50% of the economic activity taxes that are generated off of that development project, 50% are put into the special allocation fund, 50% flow to the taxing jurisdictions if there were no TIF there. And a new development came along and it increased their taxes. So that special allocation fund is a fund that the city holds that holds those pilots and eats. And what happens is those get reimbursed to the developer for the developer's redevelopment project cost. So like I said, no new taxes, it just redirects that increase that comes off of the new development project, because there was no tax base there before. It was very small. The whole point is to take property that was not developing very well and put a development on there that will help generate more property taxes and economic activity taxes. A couple other just concepts, like I said, I think I've said already, the developer, the applicant will submit a TIF plan to the city. This is what first us, Lauber Municipal Law as the city's consultants, will review this plan and make sure that it meets all of the statutory requirements. The TIF Act requires a couple different things to be in there, and we will review that and make sure that it meets all of those requirements, and if it does, it will ultimately go to you as the TIF Commission. That will be your big role, is reviewing the TIF plan and making sure that it meets the requirements that it needs to for the TIF Act. Another concept is a redevelopment area. This is where the projects will be. This is the location of the maybe one, maybe multiple different redevelopment projects. The redevelopment project is the actual development. It could be a single grocery store. It could be a grocery store with pad sites for restaurants and a gas station. It really just depends on what the developer is looking for. But what happens here is that the redevelopment project has to be activated to start capturing those pilots and eats. So that when the TIF plan is approved by the Board of Aldermen, it can have multiple different redevelopment projects within it that each have their own collection of pilots and eats. And we'll talk more about that, but that redevelopment project area being activated is what actually starts that collection of eats and pilots. Like I said, the pilots and eats reimburse the developer for their redevelopment project costs, and what their redevelopment project costs are can vary depending on the project. It is generally anything that's necessary and reasonable for the development project. This includes land acquisition, professional service costs like surveys or engineering that is necessary for the project, infrastructure improvements, and then renovation and construction of buildings also. It's a lot of different things, but generally what's necessary and reasonable for the development. Like I said, the TIF Act requires the Board of Aldermen to find that but for the redevelopment, for the tax and increment financing, the redevelopment project would not have occurred. And this is required in the statute. So if we can't find that the developer would have done this project without TIF, we can't approve this project. The funding mechanism, like I mentioned, is the pilots and the eats. So both of these are paid into the special allocation fund, which reimburses the developer on what we call a pay-as-you-go basis. Literally, as the development project goes and generates revenue, it pays back the developer. If the development project doesn't happen or it doesn't create any new taxes, there's nothing to give to the developer. So if the developer doesn't, let's say a developer comes in and gets a TIF plan approved, unless they build the project and it generates revenue, the city will not have to give anything back. There's no tax revenues there that can be collected to be paid back to the developer. So there is a couple different options as to how a project can be financed with TIF. The first is what I just mentioned, pay-as-you-go. This is what we see most often. This does require the developer to put upfront costs up to make the development. Without the development, there is no additional tax revenue, there's no additional eats, and there will be nothing to pay back the developer. There are two other options with TIF revenue bonds. We don't see these so much anymore. TIF revenue bonds could, if they aren't paid back, the city's credit could be hurt. And TIF revenue bonds with a city credit enhancement is even more risky for the city, that the city could be required to pay back those bonds if they don't get paid down by the developer. So those two, we really don't see them that much anymore. They were popular years ago, and there's been some big projects that have created some news headlines. So typically what we see is the pay-as-you-go, that if, the developer's at risk, he has to build it, they have to generate tax revenue, and if they don't, the city does not have to pay them anything. A couple advantages of TIFs. One, like I just mentioned, they could use bonds to be able to have some available funds at the beginning of the project. That is a benefit if that's what they are looking for. Another is that the TIF does not solely rely on real property tax revenue. There are a lot of economic development tools that would just abate property taxes, but that's not what we're doing here. It takes the tax revenue that is generated, but the base revenue still goes to the taxing jurisdictions. And some of the eats still go to the taxing jurisdictions. So ideally, the taxing jurisdictions aren't losing revenue. They're just letting go of some of it as the TIF is active. Another benefit for TIF is that there is a TIF commission with various jurisdictions represented here. A lot of other economic development projects don't require that, but this gives other taxing jurisdictions a say in how these projects can function. It also allows eminent domain. This is, again, something we don't see so often, but it could come up, and it could be a tool to facilitate land acquisition if need be. Okay, so now we're going to kind of deep dive into pilots. So like I said, this does not generate any new taxes. If you have a piece of property valued at $1,000 and your tax levy is $5 on $100 of assessed value, that tax revenue is $50. That goes to the taxing jurisdictions without TIF. With TIF, that still goes to the taxing jurisdictions. There's still always that base that continues to go. When a redevelopment project is activated, the county assessor will go out and assess the value and freeze it at that level so that we know exactly what it is before that project is activated. And that will remain the same throughout the duration of the TIF. Those taxing jurisdictions will always receive that base. What happens with TIF is that ideally your property value has increased. That's the entire point of the project, is to have a higher assessed value for the property. So our tax levy here stays the same. It's still $5 on $100 of assessed value, but the total revenue has increased. The total revenue is now at $5,000 because of that assessed value of the development has gone up. That means that still with TIF, that taxing jurisdiction still receives $50, but that $4,950 of the incremental increase goes to the special allocation fund. Without TIF, there may be development, there's likely not going to be, and there is no increment increase to go to any taxing jurisdictions. The other funding mechanism that we've talked about already is EATs. These are economic activity taxes. Generally, it's going to be sales taxes that increase off of the development. What happens here is that 50% of this incremental increase in economic activity taxes goes to the special allocation fund. 50% of it goes to the taxing jurisdictions. So throughout the lifetime of a TIF, the pilots, that will all go to the special allocation fund. The increase there will all go to the special allocation fund. But for economic activity taxes, 50% of it goes to the special allocation fund, 50% of it will go to the taxing jurisdiction. So while the TIF is active, the taxing jurisdictions will still see an increase in the tax revenue that they will receive from the project. Timeframes here for the actual TIF, we'll get to the TIF Commission's actions soon, but for the actual TIF, I mentioned the TIF plan earlier. When the Board of Aldermen approves a TIF plan, it could have multiple redevelopment projects within it. The 23-year clock that's mentioned here, that is how long the redevelopment project can collect pilots and eats. So the redevelopment project has to be activated for that eats and pilots to start being collected. They have 23 years after that project is activated to continue collecting taxes. After those 23 years, the project is terminated and TIF collection does not happen anymore. That all has to happen, or I'm sorry, I should say that the redevelopment project has to be activated within 10 years after the TIF plan has been approved. So your TIF plan, and we'll get to an example on the next slide, but your TIF plan is approved, and then a secondary action has to happen where the redevelopment project area is activated. That activation has to happen within 10 years of the TIF plan being approved, and then the redevelopment project is activated for 23 years. The other thing on the timelines is that the eminent domain power is available. It has to be done within 5 years after the project ordinance is activated. But again, that would all be in the TIF plan, and we would know if any eminent domain is going to be used. Okay, so this is our redevelopment area. Our TIF plan was approved in for this example, we'll say in 2018, TIF plan was approved. This is the whole redevelopment area that this project will take place in. Like I said, we can have multiple project areas. So this will be our first project area. It was activated in 2018 when the TIF plan was approved. So it has 23 years to collect pilots and eats. That's what the 2018 to 2041 here is. That project itself has 23 years. Redevelopment Project 2 is activated a year later. That project also has 23 years to collect eats and pilots. And then we could have, it really depends on the development. We could have three areas, 4 areas, but this fourth one, what I want to hit on is that the TIF plan was approved in 2018, so it has until 2028, but this one in 2027, to activate another TIF. So this project area 4 would be activated from 2027 to 2050. That means there's actually 33 years on this TIF. They have 10 years to activate project areas, and then each project area has 23 years. So if we activate in that last 10 years, then we'd have still 23 years for that last project area. And I mentioned, but the 23-year clock runs separately on each project, so while one is terminated, another project area can continue still receiving, collecting eats and pilots. A couple different redevelopment project costs that they are able to use pilots and eats for. I mentioned a few of these briefly: land acquisition costs, demolition, clearing, and grading of land, costs for renovation and rehabilitating buildings, also constructing new buildings and structures, costs to acquire and construct public improvements. Sometimes these projects need a new turn signal or a new road that MoDOT requires, and those can be included in there as well. Costs of studies, surveys, plans that need to be done for the development, also professional service costs, financing costs, just a lot of different options. There's also, I haven't mentioned it all, but typically the development area is not going to have any businesses because there hasn't been much going on there. But if they do need to relocate businesses, those costs can also be redevelopment project costs that can be reimbursed to the developer. Okay, so now we're getting to the TIF Commission's actions here. How is a TIF plan approved? It can be prepared by the city. Typically, like I mentioned, they are prepared by the applicant, and then they file them with the city. Part of the TIF Act requires us to also seek bids and proposals when we receive one, so those will go out. We also have to give mailed notice to the taxing jurisdictions, which is personal mail that is delivered to the taxing jurisdiction, but there's also publication notice. So as a TIF plan moves along through the process, you would start to see letters and different publication notices that typically let you know of when the TIF Commission public hearing is, which is when you guys will review the TIF plan. We will have a public hearing where the city will present evidence as to the whether the TIF Act requirements have been met. Typically, the applicant will also make a presentation and describe their project and go into detail about that. Because it is a public hearing, we will also hear from the public, anybody who is opposed or a proponent of the project. The public hearing is really important. That is the meeting where you guys will meet to discuss the TIF plan. So once you start getting those notices, make sure you calendar that date because we have to give a 45-day notice. So you'll have plenty of notice, but also if we need to reschedule or anything, it can be kind of difficult on the project. After the TIF Commission public hearing, at the TIF Commission public hearing, you will make a recommendation. There are 6 findings that the TIF Commission has to recommend to the Board of Aldermen, and we will get to those in just a minute, but that happens at the public hearing. The TIF Commission will make its recommendation to the Board of Aldermen, and then the board will have their own meetings to discuss the plan.
Excuse me, can we ask questions as we're going along, or do you want us to remember it to the end and ask it?
No, I think it's fine to ask now.
We would only have one meeting. Somebody comes in with a $500 million project. I know that's impossible to conceive of, but and we're going to get all that data and everything at one meeting and make a decision sitting here.
We will also have staff reports that we prepare and packet materials that will go out to you prior to the meeting, so you'll have time to read through the materials, read through the plan, and absorb all the information ahead of time.
But there's just one meeting. We don't reconvene after the public hearing. We don't reconvene after getting a chance to consider that input.
Typically, it's only one. You could continue the meeting, but typically there's only one meeting.
Thank you.
So after the TIF Commission does make its recommendation, the Board of Aldermen will have their own meetings to also approve the plan, and there's related documents, other contracts that the board will also consider. And then after the board approves the TIF plan, they will also then activate the TIF project areas, which could happen at the same time the TIF plan is approved, could happen later. It just depends on the development. So this is the typical process. First, the applicant submits the draft, then staff review will happen, and in that period is where that 45-day notice will go out. So you will have 45 days notice at least of the public hearing. After the public hearing, the Board of Aldermen will have their meetings, and then the plan is actually implemented, and the actions for that happen with city staff. Who are the TIF Commission members? It is you all. 6 members are appointed by the city. These members typically serve on terms. Typically, I think they're 4-year terms. And so the city members might have seen more projects than the other members. They might have seen less because the city had fewer TIF plans that came through. The other 5 commissioners will be 2 who are appointed by the school district, 2 appointed by the county, and then 1 who is appointed by all of the other taxing jurisdictions. That one last seat has to be agreed upon by all of the taxing jurisdictions, and then that person represents all of those jurisdictions. So that is 11 commissioners for the city of Branson. That's dependent on the city's classification and population, so that it can change sometimes. Typically, though, what we see is that the city members stay the same, and the other taxing jurisdiction members may change, they may not also. But they do serve the school district, the county, and the other taxing jurisdictions. They all serve for the length of a TIF plan. So you might also, if you're a different taxing jurisdiction representative, you might have seen more because you might have been appointed to more boards for other cities. The role of the TIF Commission as a body, we do provide notices for TIF meetings, TIF Commission meetings. Those are done by city staff. Like I said, the chair doesn't have to do all of those things. City staff handles those things. But like Mr. Groman just mentioned, we will meet once for the TIF Commission public hearing on the TIF plan. So it will be really important for the board to review the TIF plan, review the supporting documents. You would probably get a staff report from me that might be 10 pages. It depends on the development. It might be a little bit lengthy, but the goal is to lay it all out for you so that it is easier for you to understand. The TIF plan can be quite a few pages, and the goal of the staff reports are to kind of guide you through it so that you're able to review it. The public hearing will be extremely important, as I've mentioned. This is if you think of it as sort of a judicial thing, judges can't hear evidence from all sorts of different people outside of the courtroom, and that kind of plays out for you all as well. The TIF Commission should take all of that evidence from the public hearing only. The commissioners really shouldn't have any ex parte communications with the applicant or get any outside information. We want to make sure that the TIF Commission all has the same information, all has the accurate information, and that everybody, each board or each commissioner knows what each commissioner knows. That way that we all know that we all have the same information and nobody's confused or somebody heard a promise that isn't in the TIF plan. We just want to make sure that we all know the same things. Then the commission as a body will make those recommendations to the Board of Aldermen, just like the motions to make a chair. The commission will have to agree on what those recommendations are. And then there's also bylaws and bidding and proposal procedures. These have already been done by previous TIF commissions, but those also come up sometimes for the TIF commission. The role of each individual TIF commissioner, the really important thing for any sort of role is to understand your role and know what your governing body prefers. Each taxing jurisdiction might have its own thoughts, but the city also has its economic development policy. And then again, we'll say this again, but for each TIF commissioner, really important to review the TIF plan, the staff report, and all of the supporting materials. Also really important to participate in the TIF Commission meetings. Like I mentioned, we have to give a 45-day notice for the TIF Commission, so it's not something that we can just schedule again if we can't get a quorum. So it's really important that you let us know that you can come, and that if you can't, you also let us know. And then again, the public hearing is intended to get all of the information, questions, and input out there. So your active participation in the public hearing is always appreciated. That helps us create a complete record so that we make sure we have all of the information out there. And then of course, the TIF commissioners, each commissioner will vote on all of the matters before the TIF commission. City staff and consultants, that will be myself as legal counsel. The city also will hire financial consultants to help understand the finances of the project, and city staff. We all help review and evaluate the plans and what's been submitted by the developer. Like I mentioned, we'll prepare different reports for you to review that help you understand the information. Each item that the Board of Aldermen ultimately will approve will have an ordinance or a resolution with it, and those will also be prepared by us. We will be making sure that statutory requirements are met, that all of the different notices go out, that everybody is aware of all of the meetings. I haven't mentioned it too much yet, but when we get a TIF plan, we also will enter into a TIF contract with the developer, and that will govern the way that the incentives are used, and there's other things that we can include in there too, and staff will be negotiating that contract with the developer for the Board of Aldermen's ultimate approval. After the TIF plan is approved, city staff will create the special allocation fund and making sure that all of those things are working correctly, so they'll be actually implementing the plan. And then, of course, just like any other development, there's city codes that need to be met and construction meetings and those sorts of things, and those still go on with any other development in the city.
I'm sorry, before you get too much farther, you said that there shouldn't be any communication outside of the public hearing between the commissioners and others. Typically, within government and dealing with the planning commission, once we put the notice out, we'll get phone calls from people that want to discuss it. And I can see not going out to dinner with them or something like that, but I mean, if somebody calls up and wants to discuss it, can you discuss it or not discuss it?
Yes,
Is that different?
No, and I should have clarified. Generally, we would hope that the TIF commission doesn't engage in ex parte communications with the applicant. You know, you might hear stuff from citizens, and that would be okay too. Yeah. The role of the Board of Aldermen, they will ultimately approve or deny, but or approve the TIF plan and the redevelopment area. As the project moves along, they will activate those project areas. Part of the approval of the TIF plan is to select the developer, and they will also do that. The board will enter into the TIF contract. The TIF commission won't see the TIF contract, just the TIF plan, but the board will ultimately be the ones who are approving and entering into that TIF contract. And then there are other powers that are authorized once the TIF plan is activated, which includes acquiring land and then rehabilitating the structures. Okay, so I mentioned that the TIF commission has to make 6 findings. They recommend 6 findings. The Board of Aldermen ultimately has to make those 6 findings. These are what they are. The first one is actually a 2-part finding. First, the commission has to make a recommendation that the redevelopment area is blighted, or a conservation area, or an economic development area, but typically what we see is blight. You're included in your packet materials if the area is being if the developer is seeking to declare the area as blighted, there will be a blight study in your packet that will go through the different types of menaces to public health that are there on site that will aid in recommending whether or not that is a blighted area. The second part of this first finding is the but-for test, that without this incentive, this development would not have occurred. And there will be also in packets financial reports. I say that, I don't mean like just numbers, words and analysis of whether this project would meet the but-for test. But there will be reports there to aid you in that analysis too. The second finding is that the redevelopment plan conforms to the city comprehensive plan. 3, that the estimated redevelopment project completion dates are within that 23-year limit. All those projects can only be activated for 23 years, so we have to make sure that that is what the plan is. The other the 4th finding is that if necessary, that a relocation plan has been developed. Like I mentioned, this doesn't always come up because it's typically bare land that is used, but if there are businesses or people that need to be relocated, we have to make sure that there's a plan for them as well. More financial reports, the cost-benefit analysis has to be prepared. This has to show the economic impact on each taxing district, the impact on the economy overall if the project was built and if it was not built. So it'll show how much tax revenue is going to be generated by this project. And then finally, it has to show the fiscal impact study for each individual taxing jurisdiction that is affected. And then 6, we might see some change in this one, I don't know, but it also has to include that there's no development or redevelopment of any gambling establishment. Who knows how that one might change. After the TIF plan is approved, first the assessor will go out and determine that base pilot's calculation number. They will have to know what that assessed valuation of the property is, and the county assessor will go out and do that. Again, then after the TIF plan is approved, the developer and the city would enter into a TIF contract. We'll get to that soon the different things that might be listed in there, but that will ultimately kind of govern how the incentive works for the developer. That special allocation fund will be created by the city, and then if they're included in the plan, the city would then authorize any TIF bonds or debt obligations. And then the developer commences the project. They actually get started on the construction. And then once they are ready to start that 23-year clock on the redevelopment project area, the city will then pass another ordinance that says that this clock is started and this project area is active. And then once that project area is activated, the city will collect the pilots and the eats within the project area. Those will go into the special allocation fund, and then they will eventually be reimbursed back through to the developer for their reimbursable project costs. So after the TIF plan is approved, this is just a graphic for you to fully understand what will be happening here. 100% of the pilots, the increase in pilots, will go into the special allocation fund. The eats, but only 50% of the increased eats, those will go to the special allocation fund also. And then from the special allocation fund, those funds will either be the debt service on the bonds, if there's any bonds, and then it will also reimburse the developer for those other redevelopment project costs. The TIF contract, as I mentioned, the TIF Commission won't see this contract, the Board of Aldermen would, but we can include a lot of different things in here. It really depends on the project. If there are terms of land acquisition, how the developer will acquire that property, they would be included in there. Obviously, we would require the developer to construct and then build and maintain the project. We also include the project schedule and the budget so that we're able to know just how much of those project costs, what they are. It should include a list of those project costs. If there are any financing obligations for the city and the developer, those will be in there. The procedures for imposing and administering the tax increment financing, those will also go in there. It'll include, that the city has to create the special allocation fund and things like that. And then, like I mentioned, it can include a lot of different things. Sometimes we include that particular types of land use are not allowed in the area. If there's businesses that need to relocate, there might be some provisions in there. And then we also include just standard contracting terms that they are required to have insurance, that anything, if they need to build a road or work in the city's road rights of way, that they have to restore those back to their condition. And other standard contracting things like them indemnifying the city. We've only talked about TIF here tonight, but there are a lot of other different types of economic development tools, and the TIF contract could include the coordination of other tools. I think generally a TIF, doesn't add any taxes to the property, but there are other economic development tools that could create new taxes on that area, and those could be used with the development to help pay down those TIF costs. So how all that works in together could be included in the TIF contract, but it really depends. It varies on what's in there. There are other city contracts and agreements. The first one that we enter into early in the process is a funding agreement. This requires the developer to fund the initial costs to the city to evaluate the projects. We don't want to go on a wild goose chase and this developer has no intention of developing anything. So when they approach the city for an idea for a project, we require a funding agreement that funds the city's evaluation of that project. Like I just mentioned, there could be a cooperative agreement if there are separate financing districts. A CID is a separate district, so that we might have a cooperative agreement to understand how those work together. If there are bonds, there will be bond-related documents. Also, what we see a lot are transferee agreements that if the developer is a developer, they're not necessarily the person who will stay in that building and lease it for forever. So we would have transferee agreements that say that if you're going to transfer this project, we have to require all of these things for that building. If there's land purchase or sale agreements that are needed, we would include those as well. And then just any other things that we need to make sure that we get agreements on for the project details. This is how a TIF would work with a SID. So a SID is a community improvement district. It adds a 1% sales tax onto that district. What would happen then with TIF is that we talked about how TIF collects those economic activity taxes. It would collect 50% of the SID tax as well, and that would help pay down the TIF faster. It would create more revenue for the TIF to continue paying off those project costs. So we do see that sometimes, that while the TIF commission will only review the TIF, there might also be a little bit information about how the SID works as well. But really the TIF commission doesn't approve the SID or anything like that. We just, they work together sometimes and help fund the TIF well. With that, I'll take any questions, concerns.
Very good presentation, so thank you for that, especially in layman's terms. So I was wondering, you know, TIF is something that the city has used quite a bit over the years. I don't know if historically, if you could go over when we started using that and how those have done over the years.
I think I would refer to my boss, Joe Lover, on that one.
Good evening, TIF commissioners. My name is Joe Lauber. I've been representing the city as special counsel for economic development, probably going back to about 2008. You were using TIF when I came on the scene. There were TIFs. You know, in fact, the landing project was a TIF project in the city that had already been done by the time I came onto the scene. But we had done, you know, the aquarium project is an example of, I think, maybe one of the more recent ones. I don't know exactly when the city started using it. I can tell you that the TIF Act was approved in, I believe it was in the early 80s. So nothing, you know, really probably beyond that. It's been a tool since that time, but, you know, I guess at this point now we're looking at it, it's been 40 years. So I couldn't answer for you when exactly this city started doing it, but couldn't be longer than that.
Our bank's located in the original TIF, I think, of Branson Meadows.
Really? Okay.
That might have been the first one, but so you talked about pilots and EATs and bond financing. Have we utilized? I know it's mostly EATs that we've used, but have we used the other mechanisms?
So again, I assisted the city with the aquarium project. That project was a pay-as-you-go project where it was, you know, and so again, keep in mind, the funding mechanism for all TIF projects is pilots. You know, I always say it's a mnemonic, right? Pilots, P, property tax. EATs are the sales tax. By law, you have to use them all. Okay, the way it's set up is it's 100% of the incremental increase in the property tax revenues, and it's 50% of the incremental increase in the sales tax revenue. Now, Lindsay mentioned for you, you know, like TIF contracts. As we negotiate with an applicant, when they come in and, you know, usually they think, oh, look at how beautiful my baby is. This project's so awesome. You should give us millions and millions of dollars. And what our role as legal counsel and also the city's financial consultants is to say, do you really need that? And so we start to kind of whittle away at that. And that's where early on we start to vet these projects and we start working on ways to kind of, you know, like if it needs to be whittled down, we might say, hey, look, yes, the statute says we have to capture 100% of the pilots, but you don't really need 100% of the pilots to make this happen. You could do it with 50. And so then we can do, in the development agreement, we can say, this applicant has agreed, twist their arm, this applicant has agreed that they will pay 50% of the revenues that are captured off of the project back to the taxing jurisdictions. Mr. Groman had a question for me right before we started tonight about, well, can you do, you know, are you allowed to treat one taxing jurisdiction differently than another? You know, could you do something for one? And I said, you know, the answer is, by law, is that whatever we do for a type of taxing jurisdiction, so a property taxing jurisdiction or a sales taxing jurisdiction, whatever is put in the agreements for that, you have to treat all of those types of those types of taxing entities the same. So, for example, if we came up with a deal, we're vetting this before it even comes to you guys. We're vetting it with the applicant. We say, we don't think you need all of this money. You need to pay 50% of the revenues collected from pilots back. That's something we would put in an agreement that would say that. But you would see those numbers in what is presented to you, because that, as we're negotiating this stuff, we're beating the heck out of these guys really, behind the scenes before they even come forward. And so that when you see the information that we've brought forward, we're at a point where we're like, we think we've beat them up as far as they can go and, without breaking. And then, we'll bring the project to you, but we'll show you, like, here are places where we were able to, get them to, maybe a concession of some sort or whatever from what they were asking for to say, this is how this will be done.
Is there a dollar amount? I mean, if somebody comes to you with a $500,000 deal, says, I want a TIF, I mean, it's usually much bigger projects, right? But
yeah, they tend to be large, millions of dollars. And like the smallest TIF I've ever seen was one that was done in Jefferson City. That was, if anybody's been to Domenico's Steakhouse in Jefferson City, that is one building in a TIF. I've never seen it before or after, but that's Domenico's. I think I'm getting the right name on that. Usually they're for larger projects. One of the projects that I worked on, if you're familiar with the city of Grandview, they had the Truman Corner Shopping Center that had been around since the 50s, and it really fell into disrepair. We were able to use TIF and rejuvenate the center into the Truman Marketplace that it is today. Lindsay was talking about multiple projects. When that applicant first came forward, that was a redevelopment area with 13 project areas in it. We ultimately got it down to 4 through the negotiation process, but it can usually they tend to be larger. And the fact of the matter is the statutory process that you have to go through in order to get a TIF approved, there's just a lot of analysis. Lindsay mentioned, the but-for analysis. We got to do a blight study. All those things have to be done by the applicant walking in the door. And, the cost of doing that is significant. So you're not going to do it on a project that's, really just a couple $100,000. Like there are other tools that are way more, less expensive and less complicated to do. TIF tends to be kind of the upper echelon of, of an incentive type.
In the event of financing, something that has to go beyond the eats and the pilots, where the city might possibly incur some responsibility. I'll use example, Branson Landing. It went well beyond eats and pilots.
Yeah.
The city's never gotten a penny in tax from day one.
That.
How do we, is that anything we do, or is that kind of arrangement taken care of in the contract that the city makes?
So one of the things you have to keep in mind is, there's revenue, right? And there's financing, okay? First and foremost, what I will tell you is Branson Landing was done at a period of time when in Missouri, almost all TIFs were done with some sort of revenue bond financing. And it was very common for cities all over the state to do what we call, revenue enhancement. You saw the slide that she had, or there'll be credit enhancement. And essentially what that would say is that if the project fell short financially for any reason, the city would have to pay the difference in the debt service on the bonds, right? And so she had those three categories, right? And so that bottom one, anymore, that's a third rail. Like, we don't do those anymore. Like, if an applicant comes forward and they ask for that, we're pretty much like, now go away. They'll still ask for it, but, it's rare. And one of the things that happened is, gosh, it's going back probably 12 or 15 years ago now. There was a massive project for the city of Moberly for a sugar factory. And this guy came in and he said, hey, I've got, all these contracts with this Chinese company and we need to build this project. And the governor was there and they had all, all of these, state officials came in and gave it all this like extra oomph, that, everybody's thinking, yeah, this thing's gonna go. And unfortunately, and so the city of Moberly issued about $42 million worth of credit enhanced bonds. Turned out the guy was a liar and a fake and was using the money to fund his Beverly Hills mansion. He's cooling his heels in Tipton, I think, in the correctional facility today. He may be out now. It's been long enough. But the city in that circumstance actually had to just default on its own bonds. They couldn't, it was either bankrupt the city or default on the bonds, which, is an option. Like, they didn't pay for it, but they couldn't, get credit. Ever since that project happened, like, I think everybody in the state kind of went, ooh, that's a really bad thing that can happen. And I have literally never seen another credit-enhanced deal from a city, or maybe it would be a small sliver of an overall giant financing, if it did get used. I think maybe, one time I've seen it since it's called the Mamtech project. But so again, TIF creates a revenue stream, and then the revenue stream goes to either pay a developer back on a pay-as-you-go basis. It can pay TIF bonds that aren't credit enhanced, and if the TIF bonds fail, then the investors were at risk, right? You guys invest your money in other stuff that may or may not be risky, and that's the same thing. And then that third, third rail, if you will, and the other one is where the city backs it. And again, I haven't seen one in 15 years. So.
Do you see our role here as evaluating this project through the lens of the role, from which we were appointed? So am I here to represent the school board's best interest, period? Or am I looking at this project, taking off my school board hat and looking at the merits of the project and acting on behalf of only the TIF Commission?
Yeah, as Lindsay explained, each of you fill a certain role, and by statute, you are here representing the body that you're representing. So you do not take off your school district hat. And I think, the comment that Lindsay said is, part of, like knowing your role is making sure that you are communicating with your governing body as to what their feelings are about it. We're gonna get a staff report out to you as soon as possible. Typically what happens is, we'll negotiate the deal as far as we can get it with the applicant. We'll get some initial traction on, what terms of a TIF contract, and if we can get happy with that, then we did that 45-day notice letter. Okay, the plan isn't usually ready the day the 45-day notice letter comes out, but the plan will become available before you see a staff report, okay? It's out there, and then you will get a staff report, and I think as Lindsay was saying, like a TIF plan, many times, it could be 13 pages, it could be 60 pages, depending on how you're gonna count the blight study, if you're gonna count the but-for analysis and all of the information that's in there. But we're gonna take that document and we're gonna get it down in a staff report to you for about 10 pages worth of stuff. And then the night of the hearing, we'll further take that down to 5 or 6 slides, to walk it, through at every level, kind of bringing it down, And so what we would ask and what your governing body should ask of you is, hey, as soon as you get that stuff, get this information, let us know about it so, we know how we can feel, about that. And there will be, for each of your taxing jurisdictions that you're representing, there will be information for those, okay? It'll be a little harder for Mr. Fenton's, because he's representing 6 maybe or something like that. I forget what the number is, but like for the county and for the school board, heck, we've got a quorum of the commission here tonight. It sounds like so. You guys, you'll know because you're on that. And obviously you'll go to your school board as well. So, but we do have to look at the timing. You may have to do like a special meeting to get that input. I will just say that because when that comes out, it'll be coming. So we want to be aware of the timing of the TIF Commission meeting, so you're in a position to have a meeting to talk about that beforehand. So, that help you? Okay.
Are we able to, at this hearing, when they present the information, are we able to ask questions and ask for revisions and make recommendations along that line, or is it
Yeah, yes, you can do that. Our goal is hopefully to give you enough information that you can feel comfortable and, making the recommendation that evening. I'd be lying to you if I said, every single time it's exactly that. Sometimes you come in and, something unexpected happens. Maybe somebody from the public says something that's unexpected. Heck, maybe the applicant gets up and says something that we haven't heard in, 3 months of negotiating. I've had it happen. You're like, where did that come from? Like, so if that were to happen, you can do a continuance and things like that. But, so it's not completely cooked. Keep in mind though, you are a recommending body, right? So you could, even say, we recommend approval of this plan, provided that before it's approved by the Board of Aldermen, these 3 things are looked at. And that's something you could do as well, because in the end, we are a recommending body here, and the Board of Aldermen will ultimately make the decision on it. And, we didn't talk about it tonight, but I will just tell you, it is possible, I've seen it before, where the TIF Commission recommends against, and the Board of Aldermen still approves. And I've seen vice versa. The TIF Commission recommends for, and the Board of Aldermen goes against. In the end, it's their prerogative as the elected officials, for the city to make that decision. But we're here, for each of our prospective taxing jurisdictions to delay that out. And I guess I would say, as the city members, as you all that are representing the city, because I've talked with the school district and the county and the other taxing jurisdictions, but, it's important that you all know what is it that your city wants. And so, those are questions you can ask of your mayor, your city administrator, and so forth to get that type of information.
Thank you.
Quick question, sir. So you'd prefaced it or you did, ma'am, you prefaced that we would want to make sure everything's aligned with the community plan and the economic development incentives policy manual. Understanding that both of those are in flux right now and that we potentially have stuff coming down the pipe, is that going to be part of the summary, the staff report, just saying, hey, we're in flux, we recognize that this timeline for the CPC is going to take a little bit as well? I don't know where the economic policy is at, but will that be kind of taken into account until those official documents are published?
To my knowledge of the status of those is they are not fully approved. The new ones are not fully approved yet. And the way that typically works is the old ones are in place until the new ones replace them. So, we would, look at the timing. I don't know that we're in a position where, I can tell you, I don't think we're at a point where the economic development policy is going to change. I don't know where I'd have to ask Holly where the comp plan is on that. It may be unlikely that they would change, if something's coming. And we wouldn't be here if there isn't something coming, right? Like, we're working on something, we're not at a point where we can do a 45-day notice letter, but we're close enough that we thought we should, at least get you guys in here, have a discussion. I will just tell you, we really don't like doing a training like this when there's a pending application, right? Because then people start asking questions about the application outside the public hearing, which, we want to try to protect the sanctity of that public hearing. So, hence the timing here. So, does that help?
It does. It's just mainly understanding that you wouldn't want to change things when you're working with folks. I recognize that.
And to finish the thought on your question on the comp plan, like where would that come from? So when you get a TIF packet, like it's going to be giant. It is going to be giant. It's going to have a bunch of studies. It's going to have a bunch of stuff. And that's why we do the staff report, because the staff report goes through and says, out of this giant stack of paper that you just got, here's the stuff that you're going to be asked to act on. Here is where, here's the question, here's the answer to the question, and here's where you can go in this giant stack of paper and read it for yourself. We're in the show me state, right? So, so you have the opportunity to do that. So on that comp plan issue and on that economic development policy, we'll refer to where that is, or we might even, take, usually it's maybe one excerpt out of a document, and we might take that paragraph and slip it into your staff report so you see it right there, and you don't have to go look for it. So.
Perfect, thank you.
Our job is to make this as easy button for you as possible, and I guess what we would ask is, like if you get that staff report and you're looking through it and you've got questions, before we get to the hearing, if you can reach out to city staff, reach out to the chief of staff, Gerard, or, to city administrator Stepp, and ask questions, they can get those to us and we can get answers back that, you all might have the same question, that one of you read and asked the question about. We can get that back to you beforehand, or at a minimum, we can answer it for you, during our presentation at the TIF Commission hearing that night.
Yeah, no, I only ask it because if you look at the composition of the folks asked to serve on that committee that the city's pioneering, which is fantastic, the TIF, if we're convening, that's going to be a significant project to this community. And so one would hope, obviously, that would be aligned with what's to come in the upcoming rewrite.
But is it correct to say, although we have a comprehensive plan in the process, right now, as far as I know, we're still developing the survey form. If a TIF started next week, when we're talking about comprehensive plan, it would be the one that has been approved now. What's going to happen in the future wouldn't enter into the.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Just before we adjourn, should we confirm with our chairman that he accepts the nomination?
Too late.
Way to get him when he's not here.
I'll buy you dinner.
Hearing no objections?
Yeah, I think if we don't have any other further business, no more questions, we can take a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Chairman, would you like to call for a vote?
All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Good job.